On the move in the Mediterranean, 3 U.S. Navy warships are heading closer to Israel. They are on alert in the event Americans need to be evacuated from Israel. Right now, Israel and Hamas ratcheting up the attacks. Israel expanding its bombing campaign in Gaza, and Hamas rockets raining down on southern Israel. And it is only getting worse. So is the U.S. doing enough to support its ally, Israel? You will hear from Ambassador John Bolton and Senator John McCain. Plus a live report from Southern. Also tonight, Texas Senator-elect Ted.
Okay, we got the sirens going. We're going to keep going. This area was hit once before. We're going to keep moving. We're going to grab this. Keep coming this way.
We're crumbling all over the Middle East.
You have people determined to destroy Israel.
We want Hamas to stop firing at us, and we want to create a situation where they cannot fire at us every other day and paralyze half the country.
It's a terrorist group sworn to the destruction of Israel. No nation would put up with what Israel has up until now. They have to defend their people and their nation.
This is where the rocket hit. You can see the explosion through this cement wall. And obviously right now there's just this horrible smell of explosives in the air. This is what it did to a concrete walkway. So you can imagine what it would have done to any person who didn't take shelter.
We are fully supportive of Israel's right to defend itself from missiles landing on people's homes and workplaces and potentially killing civilians. And we will continue to support Israel's right to defend itself.
All of us, Republicans and Democrats, should stand with the president in supporting Israel.
It's several things that make this issue very dangerous. I think that it's very important that we recognize that the United States of America has got to push as hard as we can to resolve this Israeli-Palestinian issue.
So is the U.S. pushing hard enough? Is President Obama doing whatever he can and should do? Former UN Ambassador John Bolton joins us. Good evening, sir.
Glad to be here.
Terrible news out of the Middle East, especially Prime Minister of Turkey is now calling Israel a terrorist state, and President Morsi has condemned Israel. Israel doesn't have many friends in the Middle East right now. In fact, it has none.
Yeah, no, I think it reflects the deteriorating security situation for Israel and the United States. It's been going on for the past 2 years. But honestly, I don't think this is a question of Hamas and Israel. I think this is a question of Iran and Israel, particularly as Hamas or somebody, maybe Iranians in the Gaza Strip, are firing missiles that can hit Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. This is Iran showing that it can unleash both Hamas and Hezbollah, if need be, in response to an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear weapons program.
And let's not forget the Sudan. I have been talking about President Bashir since I went there with Franklin Graham last April, is that apparently the Iranian rockets, which can reach Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, they're being funneled through the Sudan to Egypt to Gaza to Hamas. And they're coming right through the Sudan, and the Sudan is up to their eyeballs. And you've got President Morsi, who's been very chummy with President Bashir of Sudan. They're very tight now, so that the plot thickens.
Well, that's why this idea that Mohammed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood is somehow a moderate when it comes to dealing with Israel is just fanciful. And the threat here is that if Israel backs off from its present posture with respect to Gaza, more Fajr 5 missiles will come in from Iran through Sudan, and when and if Israel decides to do something about the Iranian nuclear weapons program, the Israeli Air Force will be in a very difficult position because it can't be in 3 places at once. It can't be over Iran and over Gaza and over the Bekaa Valley trying to take out Hezbollah missiles.
And of course it was over Sudan taking out the munitions factory that they believe was Iran of less than a month ago. So that they can't be that place either.
Right. No, I think this is a decision Iran has made to demonstrate what many people have feared for a long time, that Hamas has, at least elements of Hamas, have this capability that's a direct threat. And whether the missiles are actually impacting in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem right now is not the issue. If the Iranians give them their capabilities and guidance systems, these missiles can be quite accurate even at that long range.
Well, this is no surprise. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been warning the world for a long time that he's going to take action against Iran, and of course against everyone knew he'd take action against Hamas if Hamas continues to send rockets into Israel. Is there something that President Obama has failed to do that perhaps might have changed, might have put the lid on this, or is there nothing, or is this just inevitable?
No, I think President Obama still believes he can find a way to negotiate with Iran over the nuclear program, and I think there's a deal out there, unfortunately, that he will try and cook when he can. So I think Iran, sensing this weakness and vulnerability, seeing that Netanyahu's constrained because of the election he's called in January after our inauguration, is making it clear they now have, in effect, Israel encircled. Hezbollah in the north, Hamas on the south, their own capabilities from the east.
Have we let Israel down?
Well, I think we've been pressuring Israel for the last 4 years to cut a deal with the Palestinians, not to do anything about the Iranian nuclear weapons program. We've been ignoring what the real strategic reality is, that Iran, its support for terrorism, its nuclear weapons program, is the real destabilizing influence. Now, combined with the Arab Spring that's gone so badly wrong, things are going downhill in the Middle East, not just from Israel's perspective, but from the American perspective.
Is there a likelihood of Israel says that it's amassing soldiers on the border, doesn't want to do a ground war, but it's possible. The Palestinians, or Hamas, says that it wants the blockade to stop to Gaza. The Israelis want the rockets to stop going into Israel. Where does this lead?
Well, I think Israel's position continues to deteriorate. There is no deal. There's no truce with a terrorist group like Hamas. And let's be clear, they're barbaric in two respects. Number one, they're firing rockets at Israeli civilians. And number two, they're hiding behind their own Palestinian brethren to try and get shields, human shields, from the Israeli retaliation. So this is a no-win situation for Israel, especially when, although President Obama rhetorically has been supportive of Israel publicly, behind the scenes, I think most people believe he's put incredible pressure on the Netanyahu government not to go in on the ground.
Ambassador, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And tonight's Senate is demanding an apology from UN Ambassador Susan Rice. He wants... Senator, nice to see you, sir.
Thank you.
I understand, sir, that you think Ambassador Susan Rice should apologize for going on 5 Sunday morning talk shows pushing that video protest story. There are a lot of people who go on TV who say things that are wrong. She has now had sort of a public condemnation over it, at least by many. Isn't that enough?
Well, I think when you are speaking for the President of the United States, which she was, that's very different from people just going out and giving their opinions on on various talk shows. But so I think it's vastly different. She was speaking from the White House. She had access to classified information. So, again, she should have known better because we now know that there was information from classified sources, which clearly indicated that this was a al-Qaeda-affiliated attack as well. And by the way, that's still hard to understand why you would keep information from the American people, which would give you an entirely different depiction of what happened because it's, quote, classified sources. That's a subject of another argument. But the fact is, she came out speaking for the White House, even though the president incredibly said she had nothing to do with Benghazi. So the question is what in the world was she doing out there speaking about Benghazi? But she spoke to the American people on behalf of the President of the United States. That's very different from voicing an opinion on a talk show.
Well, maybe he should apologize under your theory, since apparently it came from the White House, and apparently in many ways it looked like, although I think she should have asked questions, that she might have been hung out to dry by somebody else, unless she knew that it was wrong and she said it, but we don't have any information like that.
Well, again, there was classified information, which in her position as ambassador to the UN, she had access to that. But the real issue here is not Susan Rice. It is before, during, and after the total failures that this administration engaged in, which has caused the deaths of these 4 brave Americans. The warnings in the beginning, which I have gone through with you in the past, the attacks on the consulate, the cables, the August 16th message saying that they could not resist a sustained attack from on the consulate, to why in the world on September 11th there was no military capabilities there in the region over a 7-hour fight, to afterwards, obviously, the president saying in a second debate that he had said that it was a terrorist attack on September the 12th, when in fact he didn't. In fact, we now know that 60 Minutes suppressed, the program 60 Minutes suppressed the interview that he had where he stated, we don't know who is responsible for this attacks, and even the 25th of September. Before the United Nations, the president talked about hateful videos. Now, he had to have had that information 2 weeks after the attacks.
Well, I certainly think there's a lot of explaining to be done, a lot of questions by the administration, and I hope we get to the bottom. But let me turn to another pressing problem. The Prime Minister of Turkey called Israel a terrorist state. That's on the heels of President Morsi saying, condemning Israel for what's going on in the Middle East right now, including President Morsi saying Egypt today is different than Egypt yesterday, and that Arabs today are different than the Arabs of yesterday, which I see as very ominous. Your thoughts about that?
It's very disturbing. The Arab Spring has intended consequences and unintended consequences. This statement by Prime Minister Erdogan, who, by the way, I know has to be repudiated and repudiated strongly. It can only encourage Hamas when he has that kind of language, calling Israel a terrorist state. And then, of course, Morsi has his constituencies in Egypt. But this is also, Greta, a sign of American weakness. They can say these things without paying any price for it. There's got to be a price to pay for them doing this. And if this, God forbid, conflict escalates, it is a sign of American weakness throughout the region. Before, in crises, Henry Kissinger was there, or Jim Baker was there, or somebody was there brokering the process and bringing about a halt to it. Now the president makes phone calls from Burma. We have dramatically changed, and I can tell you again, al-Qaeda is on the rise, and they are moving throughout the Middle East, and Americans we are going to pay a very heavy price for it because of the lack of American leadership.
What should President Obama be saying to the Prime Minister of Turkey?
Excuse me, sir, but you're not telling the truth. Well, I would have a private conversation with him, the president should, but publicly, the president should absolutely rebuke that statement. The State Department spokesperson today refused to do that. You can't let those kinds of things be said about a democratic state that's under rocket attack. And it's all got to do with Mr. Erdogan's desire to be the leader of the Arab world. And I don't blame him for wanting to do that, but when he goes to these lengths, he has to be repudiated. And if he really believes that, it obviously has to affect our relations with the country.
What should Secretary of State Hillary Clinton be doing, or is this a matter for President Obama at this point to make public statement?
Well, first thing I'd do, I'd find out when the next plane to the Middle East takes off. I'm not sure I would hang around that part of the world. By the way, this is an interesting aspect of the president's, quote, pivot to Asia. We can't pivot away from the Middle East, Greta. There's too many things going on there for us to pivot away from it. But look, she should be over there. She should be over there the way Henry Kissinger used to and other of our secretaries of state. But the question is what influence does she have because of the waning influence, because of the perception of weakness throughout the Arab world, whether it be in Iraq, where there's just recently fighting and the al-Qaeda setting up terrorist camps, or where now 40,000 people have been massacred in Syria, and we have said Assad must go and do nothing to facilitate that process, to obviously the Iranians are sending those missiles in, as you mentioned, through the Sudan into Egypt and then to Gaza, and those are longer range missiles. Thank God for Iron Dome, by the way. And so we have to make sure that we reassert American influence, and that means American power, and that doesn't mean leading from behind.
Senator, thank you very much, and I'll tell you that I wish America paid more attention to what's going on in the Sudan, because they are the root for those powerful missiles and so much other bad things. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and you're right about Sudan.
A top militant leader. Now, it's just about dawn in the region, about 5:14 a.m. Fox News correspondent David Lee Miller is live in southern Israel with the very latest. David Lee?
Greta, it is just about dawn. It is the dawn of a new day, and this could be the most critical day yet in this conflict. In the next few hours, we expect to learn if, in fact, there is going to be a ceasefire or an escalation. The Israeli cabinet has been meeting, as best we know, throughout the night, 9 members of that cabinet, to decide whether to accept or to reject a peace plan that has been negotiated in Egypt. Meanwhile, not far from where I am standing, there are troops and tanks ready to move into Gaza if they do get the go-ahead. Only hours ago in Cairo, the exiled leader of Hamas, Khaled Mashallah, held a news conference saying that he is not looking for any escalation of the conflict, but he did say, and I quote him, "We will not accept any Israeli demands. They are the ones who attacked. A ceasefire will occur when our demands are met." Specifically, Hamas wants an end to the blockade of Gaza, and they are also calling for no more targeted assassinations by Israelis. Israel is calling for a buffer zone around the border with Gaza and for an end to all the rocket attacks. Before the escalation of the current conflict, hundreds and hundreds of rockets had been fired by militants into Israel for the past several months. Now, just hours ago, we heard yet more air raid sirens in the south. The Iron Dome missile defense system once again did its job. We looked up and we could see interceptions taking place. There were no injuries. The Israel military keeping up its pressure. In Gaza, there were a number of airstrikes in the last several hours. We are told by our producer on the ground one of the targets was a bank in Gaza with links to Hamas. Additionally, we are told that a building used by the government for security facilities was also hit. And lastly, Greta, we should mention that today we did not see any rockets targeting Tel Aviv. We do not understand why. Possibly their longer-range missiles have been depleted. Possibly they are saving them. Perhaps it is just tied to the diplomatic efforts. We will find out more in the next few hours. All the analysts here believe within the next 24 hours either there's going to be a ceasefire or some type of an escalation. Everyone in the region holding their breath. Greta?
David Lee, any issue about the fact that it's Egypt that is sort of trying to broker this peace agreement? Egypt would be the typical choice years ago, but in light of the fact that President Morsi has condemned Israel about this, any awkwardness, or is he just the only choice?
Well, it's interesting because Egypt is trying to broker a peace deal, but the point you're making is a good one. They're not only brokers, they're also participants in this process, because one of the things that Hamas is calling for is that the border that Hamas has with Egypt, the Rafah border crossing, be opened up. In the past, Egypt has resisted that, and now it appears that is one of the issues being negotiated. To what extent Israel wants to seem like they have resolved this crisis could depend very much on their willingness to open at least some of that border crossing for goods and supplies. So in the past, they played a very different role. Now they have very clearly aligned themselves with the Hamas government. How far are they willing to go? That remains to be seen. We all have to keep in mind that the Egyptian government receives billions of dollars in financial aid from the U.S., and that is something that is going to be significant in the decision-making process. Greta?
David Lee, thank you. It's 5:18. Israel sun's coming up, and let's hope that we have good news throughout the day, but it looks bleak. Thank you, David Lee.